idea, as I said yesterday, behind this retreat, focus on the suttas. And when I focus on the suttas or the word of the Buddha, I like usually to do things that are of a practical significance, things that people can use in the meditation practice and also in the ordinary day-to-day lives. And because of that, I will be looking at the Noble Eightfold Path, which is probably the most important, most kind of basic set of practices for how to advance the path towards enlightenment. It's very practical, and it's very useful, I think, to look at this path in great detail. This is why I've chosen this, and this is what we're going to be looking at through this retreat. And there's, of course, the Noble Eightfold Path. You can almost expand it infinitely. So there's almost the whole Tipitaka can kind of fit into the Noble Eightfold Path. Maybe I shouldn't say Tipitaka, maybe I should just say the Sutta Pitaka can fit into the Noble Eightfold Path. And for that reason, it is very easy to fill a whole retreat with just looking at this. Before I start looking at the Noble Eightfold Path itself, I want to look at a few introductory suttas. And the idea with these introductory suttas is, again, just to give you some background information about meditation practice itself, give you some overall understandings of the Buddhist path before we go into the more of the details. And this very first sutta that we have picked out, or I have picked out rather, is called volition, and the Pali word for this is Chaitana. It's called the Chaitana Sutta. And the reference numbers, you can see the reference numbers there. So this is AN 11:2. That means Anguttara Nikaya, the 11th Nipata, the Anguttara 11th, and the second sutta of that. That's what it refers to. So this is the sutta. And of course, before maybe I even say anything about the sutta, it's also, I think, relevant and important to understand why is it that I have chosen certain particular suttas for this retreat. How do you choose what you're supposed to read? How do you choose what you're supposed to focus on in the Sutta Pitaka? Sutta Pitaka is so large. You could choose anything, right? You could pick out suttas at random if you wanted to. You could put it all together and you can make a retreat out of that. But because you cannot do the whole Sutta Pitaka, what should you choose? What should be the main focus when you look at the suttas? And of course, you will hear many different opinions about which suttas are important and which suttas aren't important, right? Some people will say this sutta, other people will say that sutta, depending often on the tradition they have been part on, depending on what kind of teacher they had, and all these kind of things. But is there any kind of objective ground upon which we can stand and decide which suttas actually matter the most on this path? And to me, the most obvious way of looking at this is first to look at, well, what did the Buddha himself say here? What did the Buddha say? These are the teachings that really matter, right? These are the core teachings of the Dhamma. And this is the first thing to ask. And of course, once you start to read, especially towards the end of the Buddha's life, towards the end of his life, he's kind of laying down, he's saying, this is my legacy, this is the Dhamma, this is what you should remember for future generations. And when you start to read that, in particular the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, in there he often talks about the 37 Bodhipakya Dhammas, right? And he often says, this is the teaching, this is what you should remember, this is what you should recite, this is what matters. The other aspects of what I have taught, or whatever it is not so important. This is the core part of my teaching. And of course, the 37 Bodhipakkya Dhammas includes, of course, all the factors about the practice in particular, the Noble Eightfold Path, the 7 Bhojangas and all these things. So it's all about practice. It's all about the very practical aspects of Buddhism and not more theoretical aspects. So this is the first way to decide, right? What did the Buddha himself say here? And one of the things that the Buddha says as well, again, this is found in the Mahaparinibbana Sutta. The Mahaparinibbana Sutta is very interesting in this way because the Buddha is here pointing out what the Dhamma is really about. How should the monastic Sangha live and function after the Buddha passes away here? And of course everybody is very sad, right? The Buddha is going to pass away. Oh no, the Master, the eye of the world, is passing away here. What are we going to do? And when the Buddha is confronted with this just before he's dying, he says that, first of all, he says, I'm not going to appoint another teacher, right? If somebody wants to be a teacher for the Sangha, they should come forward on their own. I'm not going to appoint somebody else. However, what he says, that when I pass away, it is the Dhamma, it is these teachings that you have inherited. This is going to be your teacher after I pass away, right? That is, when you think about that, it is incredibly significant. One of the things that I have noticed when I travel around the world, and I travel quite a bit, but even if I don't travel, even if I just stay in Perth, we have monks coming through quite regularly. And one of the things, also you ask lay people about the same question, and one of the things I've always discovered is, when you ask somebody, who do you take as your teacher? People always say, it is Bhante so-and-so, right? Sayadaw so-and-so, Ajahn so-and-so, right? Or maybe Bodhisattva so-and-so. Some people say Bodhisattva so-and-so. I don't know, maybe in Korea they say that, I'm not sure. And so they have all these people who are the teachers, right? But how often do you hear anybody says, the Buddha is my teacher? Nobody ever says that, right? And yet this is what the Buddha said that we should do when he passes away. We should take his Dhamma, his teachings as the gold standard. This is what really we should be doing. The Dhamma is now going to be your teacher when I have passed away. So this is why the 37 Bodhipakkya Dhammas, these are often called the wings to awakening or the aids to awakening in English translations, and why these are so central. Another way of looking at this question about what is important on the Buddhist path, what suttas we should focus on, is to look at what are the teachings that the Buddha teaches again and again to his disciples. Right? If the Buddha teaches something again and again, if he says the same thing in this town, in that town, to this disciple and that disciple, if it is something that he emphasizes wherever he goes, then obviously it must be a basic teaching of the Buddha. There are certain things in the Nikaya that occur only one place or here or there, so it was not something that was emphasized, but there are certain things that you see again and again and again. And one of those things is what I taught here a couple of years ago. For those of you who were not here, which is most of you, that was the gradual training, the Anupubbha Sikka, right? Anupubbha Sikka, which starts off with the faith in the Buddha and it goes all the way to the awakening here. Right? That is one thing you see so many times. You look at the Digha Nikaya, it occurs in out of the first 13 suttas, it occurs 12 times in the Digha Nikaya. If you look at in the Majjhima Nikaya, there's another 15 or 20 times in the Majjhima Nikaya, right? You also find it in the Anguttara Nikaya at least once. I don't think it is found in the Samyutta. Maybe I'm wrong about that. But anyway, it's a lot, right? It occurs again and again. So this is how I decide what is the most important teachings, by looking at how often they actually occur. Now coming back to this sutta that we're going to talk about today, the Chaitanya Sutta, Volition, this is one of these suttas, not exactly in this form, but the same kind of structure is something you find in many, many places in the Pali Canon. Often you find it, not all the links that you find here, sometimes you find only some of these links, but if you look at the general structure of this particular sutta, the general kind of idea of one thing leading to another one with this sutta is basically the essence of how meditation is experienced, If you look at that, it is something that occurs in very, very many places in the sutras. And for that reason, it is, as far as I can see, one of the core teachings of Buddhism. So this is how I decide on these things. And not only is it found in the Pali tradition, this particular sutta, this kind of structure, is also found in the Chinese tradition. If you look at the Agamas, this sutta is found in the Madhyama Agama of the Chinese tradition. There is a translation now into English of this, the first volume of the Chinese Madhyama Agama, and you can see it there. And what is it? And this is, I think, something which is very important to understand and appreciate, is that when you look at this particular sutta in the Madhyama Agama, you compare it to the Pali, it is almost exactly the same, right? It has exactly the same steps. The steps are described in exactly the same way, right? This is the Madhyama Agama. This is a Chinese translation. Now that Chinese translation, where does that come from? Can everybody hear me okay? Just to make sure? Yes? Okay. Where does that Chinese translation come from? And some of you may already know a little bit about the history of Buddhism, but this is a very significant aspect of Buddhist history. And the Chinese translation of the Madhyama Agama comes from the Sarvastivadin school, right, of Buddhism. Now the Sarvastivadin school of Buddhism, that was established probably soon after Ashoka, or around the time of Ashoka. Ashoka sent his missionaries around India, and Buddhism started to spread out very rapidly during the time of Ashoka. And the Sarvastivadin school became established in the north of India, in what today is basically Kashmir, right? At the same time, we know from history that the Theravada school at the same time went from central parts of India all the way down to Sri Lanka. This was around the time of Ashoka. So this is now almost 2,300 years ago, right? Ashoka was coronated, I think, roughly about 268 BC. So we're talking about almost 2,300 years. One school went to Sri Lanka, the other one went to Kashmir. Then it went from Kashmir, it went on the Silk Road into China. And then the suttas were translated into Chinese once it arrived in China. So these schools have been separated for 2,300 years. It's astonishing. It's an incredibly long period of time, right? And they have been copied and recopied, written down again and again. And then, when you compare them after 2,300 years, you would think surely they would be completely different, right? After all this copying and things. But no. They are virtually exactly the same. And that is, I think, is one of those incredibly eye-opening things on the Buddhist path, because how do we know that the suttas we have are authentic? How do we know that these are the real things? Of course, people have faith that they are authentic. People say you practice them, they give the same results. But all of these things are always going to be some degree of uncertainty and all that. But if you can show that things have been passed down accurately through memory, through writing, if you can show that in a more objective way, then of course it becomes very powerful. So you can be fairly certain that the things that I'm going to read out on this retreat is very, very close to how the Buddha expressed these things 2,500 years ago. Right? So actually what we are reading is with a fairly high degree of certainty almost exactly what the Buddha himself said. So that, I think, is very important, because it's easy to have faith, but it's also important to ground the faith in reality. And if the faith can be grounded in reality, it becomes so much stronger and so much more realistic as a consequence. Okay, so let us get started with this sutta, because, as always, time tends to go very fast. So I will read it out, and then I will comment on this sutta after I have read this out. Bhikkhus, for a virtuous person, one whose behavior is virtuous, no volition need be exerted. Let non-regret arise in me. It is natural that non-regret arises in one who is virtuous, one whose behavior is virtuous. For one without regret, no volition need be exerted. Let joy arise in me. It is natural that joy arises in one without regret. For one who is joyful, no volition need be exerted. let rapture arise in me. It is natural that rapture arises in one who is joyful. For one with a rapturous mind, no volition need be exerted. Let my body become tranquil. It is natural that the body of one with a rapturous mind is tranquil. For one tranquil in body, no volition need be exerted. Let me feel pleasure. It is natural that one tranquil in body feels pleasure. For one feeling pleasure, no volition need be exerted. Let my mind be concentrated. It is natural that the mind of one feeling pleasure is stilled. For one who is stilled, no volition need be exerted. Let me know and see things as they really are. It is natural that one who is stilled knows and sees things as they really are. So there you are. That is the extract from this sutta called Chaitana in Pali. And it actually goes on after this, it continues on all the way to Vimutti, which is liberation, 3 more stages afterwards. But I've taken this part out because it roughly corresponds to the Noble Eightfold Path. And the things that come after this, they are almost like a natural and automatic consequence of practicing the Noble Eightfold Path. So I have left that out. We can discuss that as well if you like, but I think this is the most important part because it is very practical, it is very easy to relate to these things for most people who are practicing meditation seriously. So the first thing about this sutta, which I think is significant, there are many points in this sutta which are very important, I think. But one of the interesting things about this sutta is that it is really about what I will call the psychology of meditation. Right? By psychology I mean the subjective experience. How does it feel like to meditate? That is what this is about. That's what I mean by psychology. What does it feel like in your mind when meditation is progressing in the right way? And this is, of course, this is very significant because for many reasons. One reason is that you will notice when you read the suttas that the Buddha is teaching the path, teaching the way from so many different angles and in so many different aspects. And one of the ways that he teaches the Dhamma is always from the point of view of experience. What does it feel like to practice these things, right? If you have sila, what does that feel like? If you're generous, what does it feel like? And everything is brought back to our personal experience. And of course that is very important because it means that we have like a guidance, right? We know whether what we're doing is working, whether it's going in the right way. That is one way that the Buddha approaches teaching. Another way that he does is more like what to do, right? One thing is how we experience the path, another thing is how we do the path, how we apply ourselves. And this is what you find in the Noble Eightfold Path. The Noble Eightfold Path is how we apply ourselves. The gradual training is about how we apply ourselves. What are we supposed to do? We're supposed to watch the breath, right? We're supposed to practice a certain amount of morality. And so the Buddha approaches the path, especially in these 2 different ways. From the practical perspective, what to do, and from the experiential, personal perspective, how we're supposed to feel the path inside of us. And again, it's fabulous when you start to read the suttas in this way. You start to see the skillful means of the Buddha, how he approaches things from different angles to give us a complete view of what is happening here. But this is about the psychological feeling of the path arising in us. And as I said, this is obviously very important and very significant because it gives us a map of whether we are going in the right way, right? These are like the milestones. These are like the little stones on the side of the road saying so and so many kilometers to Nibbana, right? Nibbana is so and so many kilometers down the road. So if you are on the first one, kind of, joy, okay, there's still a few kilometers left, right? When you come to kind of seeing things as they really are, you're getting quite close. So these are like the little milestones. And of course that always allows us to have some kind of judgment, some kind of perception of whether we are heading in the right direction or not. So this is very, of course, very useful. So please use this as a map, as a psychological map of how and whether we are practicing in the right way. It becomes very useful for that very reason. Now, what kind of things do you see in here? Now, there's two things in particular that you see as part of this map, and one of the most kind of powerful things that you see here is this emphasis on happiness throughout, right? So happiness is part of this map. And what we are seeing here is kind of essentially how happiness is enhanced and becomes more profound and more deep as meditation progresses. So this is the first of the milestones, right? It's the happiness milestone. If happiness is developing in the right way. More and more profound happiness, deeper sense of contentment as you move along here. And the other one, which is mentioned a little bit more only once, which is also, of course, a type of happiness in itself, is here tranquility, passaddhi. And this is another factor of the path that we can see very often in the suttas. It has different words for it, santi, passaddhi, upassana, all these words, which mean the sense of peace and tranquility. So this is the other milestone, right? Is the mind becoming more peaceful? Are things slowing down? Is the mind becoming more one-pointed as we do the practice? So these are the two basic milestones that we see in this particular structure of the psychological movement of the mind as we move forward on the path. Tranquility, peace on the one hand, happiness and joy on the other hand. Right? Then you know, right? Then you have some idea. Am I heading in the right direction or not? And this idea of heading in the right direction, it is twofold. It is within every single meditation you sit down. You can know whether that particular meditation is going the right way. And also, it is the more macro view when you look at your meditation over a long period of time, over the years, over the months. Is it heading in the right direction? Generally speaking, becoming more profound, more tranquil, more happy. So these are the two main factors in this, what I consider very important sutta, that the Buddha expresses how we should judge, how we should decide whether our meditation is going in the right way. It is not all, but there is much more to meditation than these things. Of course, you have to have mindfulness, right? Mindfulness is obviously part of this. Mindfulness really happens at the very beginning when the sila gets established. Energy is part of this, the virya, right? Sati, virya. The mind which is happy is also the energetic mind, so virya is part of this, but it comes in at the very beginning. Sampajanya is part of this, right? The clear comprehension, the understanding of what you're doing, whether you're heading in the right way. All of these things have to be part of this, and all of these things are important because they all mean that it gives you some idea, again, of whether your mind state is actually right or not. But the two eminent things here is happiness, and the second one, a little bit less, is tranquility. So this is the first thing. So please use these kind of teachings as a sense, as a feeling for whether you're heading in the right direction. And if you are not heading in the right direction, right, that is when you need to investigate. You need to think, why isn't it going in the right direction? And this is something I will talk about in a second. But first of all, I want to say a few other things about this sutta, first of all. So this is the first idea, the idea of milestones, or whether we're going in the right way here. The second thing, which is so, again, which I think needs to be perhaps emphasized again, is that it is all about happiness again, right? If you look at these factors down here, non-regret, right? Non-regret is a kind of happiness. Regret is suffering, non-regret is a type of happiness. And from there on, it becomes even more obvious. Joyful, pamujja in Pali, gladness inside, right? From the joy comes the piti. Piti is again the highest sort of happiness, which goes beyond the pamujja. Here translated as rapture. It's very random how you translate these terms into English, right? It's not very clear that they necessarily have to go in this order, but anyway, these are the words they have used. Then from rapture comes tranquility. From tranquility comes sukha. Then comes samadhi. Samadhi is the vivekaja piti sukha, right? So that's also piti sukha. So everything is about happiness. Everything is about improving the joy, the gladness, the well-being of a person, the ease and the sense of contentment and happiness in the world. And I think this is such a, again, because this is a central sutta on the Buddhist path, it is so important to take note of that, because it actually says a lot about how we should practice. It says a lot about how the mind should be leading in a certain direction. And you cannot really attain happiness through pain. This is actually another, I think, very important point which comes out in the suttas a lot, and this is the discussion the Buddha has with somebody. I think that is with this. I think is the which sutta is the Bodhiraja Kumara Sutta or something like that, Majjhima 85, and the Buddha is discussing with Bodhiraja Kumara, and Bodhiraja Kumara says to him, he has been previously a disciple of the Jains or something, so he says to the Buddha, it is through pain that happiness is to be gained, right? This is the Jaina idea. It is through pain that happiness is to be gained. And then the Buddha says, no, this is what I thought too before my awakening, right? The Buddha is saying that he had wrong view before the awakening, which is quite astonishing, really. This is what he says. This is what I thought too before my awakening, that happiness is to be gained through pain. No, but that is actually wrong. And then when you see how the Buddha describes the path, it is very clear that it is through happiness, really, that happiness is to be gained, right? Not through pain. Happiness comes through more happiness. Happiness builds upon happiness. This is actually what we are seeing here. And there's something very powerful about that, right? This path which is all about happiness, happiness leading to more happiness, there's something very attractive and beautiful about that. And please, I think, let us remember that. Let us rejoice in such an amazingly beautiful teaching, and not allow it to become something less than it is, by perhaps, as so many people do, and I was saying yesterday, experiencing far too much pain in the meditation. And I think, really, that they have left the middle way when they actually almost deliberately pursue pain by sitting in painful postures for far too long, and not understanding that as long as there is pain in the body, you cannot let go of the body. When you cannot let go of the body, it's very hard to enter the happiness of the mind. As long as there is pain in the body, the mind is interested in the body. As long as there is pleasure in the body, the mind is interested in the body. Take away the pleasure and the pain in the body, and the body falls away. And this is what I was trying to get to during the meditation yesterday, is the idea to make the body be so peaceful, so quiet, no pain, no pleasure in the body, nothing at all, so peaceful that it just basically falls away and disappears. And that is where the pleasure of mind can start to arise. So please notice this. For me, it's such an eye-opener, right? Because this obviously is the direct word of the Buddha. So this is the first thing. The second thing about this, which I find is very fascinating, is this which is translated here as no volition need be exerted. And the Pali for this, that is very kind of you, thank you very much. So this is kindness in action. Volition need be exerted, and the Pali here is na chetanaya karaniya. Na chetanaya karaniya. What does that actually mean? Karaniya is a word in Pali which means not to be done, right? It's what they call, grammatically, it's called in English, I don't know what it's called in Pali actually, it's called the future passive participle. It means not to be done, or cannot be done. That's what it means. And na chetanaya means not by the will, right? Not by volition. So it means this is not something that can be done by the willpower, by doing, by volition. So the translation here, I think, is perhaps a little bit misleading, that no volition need be exerted. It would be better to say, this cannot be done through volition. That would probably, in my opinion, be a more accurate translation. So for for a virtuous person, this cannot be done by volition. Let none regret arise in me. In other words, non-regret arising is not something that happens through volition. Right? Volition means the will, the doer, activity, exerting yourself, putting pressure on yourself, whatever it is. That is not the way this happens. In fact, it cannot be done by this. And this is true for every step of this path, every step all the way down. This is not to be done by the will. Again, this is obviously very significant. It means that instead of this being something that we do, something that we give rise to through our intentions, through our willpower, through our activities, through forcing ourselves in one way or another, it is something that arises as a natural cause and effect process. And this is why it says here, right? It is natural that non-regret arises in one who is virtuous. Right? It is natural. It is dhammata. Dhammata is the Pali. It's in accordance with nature. It's in accordance with the laws of nature, if you like, that these things happen. So what that has very significant, has great significance in how we actually proceed with our meditation practice. It means that all these states, all these things here, are not things that we bring into existence by exerting ourselves, by using the willpower and all these kind of things. It is a process that happens all entirely by itself. And what that means is that when we meditate, if the foundation is strong enough, if the foundation is in place, then all we have to do is to wait, right? All we have to do is to sit back, focus on the breath, focus on the metta, focus on whatever it is, and just allow the process to happen by itself. It is not to be done by volition, not to be done by the will, means that the will gets in the way. If we try to will this thing into existence, we're doing exactly the opposite of what this sutta says we should be doing. And again, this is why when we meditate in the right way, as far as I can see from this particular sutta, what we're doing, instead of actually doing things in our meditation, we're stopping the doing of things. And we are sitting back, and we're allowing the process to happen, and just allowing the states to come up. And the more we are able to sit back, the more we are able just to watch and allow things to be, the more the process will happen all by itself. This is really what this is saying, right? And of course, again, this is very beautiful and very nice, because it means that the path is so easy, it is so relaxing, right? All you have to do is to be patient, sit back, don't have to do anything at all. And there's something very beautiful about that, about sitting back and just waiting in the present moment, not doing anything in particular, just allowing these states to come by itself. It makes for a very easy type of meditation practice. But of course, and this is kind of the crucial issue here, that process will only work if the initial things have been put into place. Once those initial things have been put into place, then this process happens as a result. So this is then the next thing I want to talk about is very briefly, well, what is that initial condition that needs to be put into place for the process to happen by itself? And of course that is because this is a causal sequence and it starts at the beginning and all the following factors happen by themselves. Because that is the case, the very first factor in this causal sequence is obviously the foundation stone upon which everything else rests. So this is really the important one, right? Once that foundation stone is in place, everything else happens as a consequence. What is that foundation stone? It is here the English word virtue. Pali word is sila, right? It says this, the silavant, the person who has sila, the sila sampanno person. Sila sampanno, sampanno means like endowed with, but it also can mean somebody who has perfected, right, sila. So it is the person who has sila. It is for that person that this path of meditation works. Okay, so again, a very important message. It means that when you sit down and you wait and you allow everything to happen by itself, right? If it doesn't happen, why? because your sila isn't good enough, right? That's what it means. So you may think that your sila is very good, right? It's very easy to think that you're saying, I'm keeping the 5 precepts, I'm keeping the patimokkha sila, right? But actually, if it isn't working, it means you're still not doing well enough. It doesn't mean that you're not keeping the 5 precepts well enough. It doesn't mean that you're not keeping the patimokkha sila well enough. What it means is that the sila, what is meant by sila in Pali, is much more than just the things that we should refrain from. And this is such an important thing to understand. Sila, the way it is used in other contexts, it means like habit. It means like our personality. It means like who we are as human beings. So our whole personality has to be transformed. It's not enough to grasp onto the 227 rules of the Patimokkha. They are important, of course, but it's not enough. We need to go beyond that. That is just to make sure we don't do all the bad stuff, right? But actually, there's the other side of the coin. We also need to do the good stuff, all the good things. So we have to have this heart of generosity, right? We have to have the heart of kindness, the heart of gentleness, this feeling inside of us. And these are the things that we develop in our everyday life. Whether we are monastics or lay people doesn't really make much difference. Everybody has to do these things. Otherwise, this just doesn't work. That's what it means. So we need to investigate our sila. Can I do more to have a better heart, to be more good-natured? What can I do to move myself in that direction? So that is the first thing about sila. And of course, the other thing about sila, if sila means character, if sila refers to personality, who we are, then of course it also has to do with the mind, right? So what is our mental sila? Are we people who, do we get angry? Do we have a lot of greed? Or do we have a lot of compassion and kindness to the people around us? How do we feel about the people around us in this world? And this is the mental sila. Do we have the sense of renunciation in our minds? Especially for monastics, of course, if you have the idea of renunciation in your mind, it's a very, very powerful source for leading you towards samadhi. This is where I think the monastic path is so exceptionally powerful compared to what it is for lay people. That we have that ability and the possibility of practicing and developing renunciation, especially as a mental habit, much more than the lay people have. And this is part of sila. Renunciation too is part of sila. So this is what we have to do, right? So ask yourself, are you getting the joy in the meditation? When you sit back and you just relax, how do you feel inside? And if that pamudja doesn't arise by itself, you have to be brutally honest with yourself. Why isn't it arising? What am I not doing good enough? If you get a bit of pamudja, but it doesn't go any further, how can I improve my sila even more so that all of these factors come into being, right? The more powerful the sila, the further along these factors the mind will take you. If the sila is very, very strong, you will go all the way to samadhi without any problems. If the sila is weaker, you may only come to piti, right? The piti, feeling the rapture in the body. If the sila is even weaker, perhaps you only get a bit pamudja. If the sila is even weaker, you get nothing at all. You sit there, you feel a bit peaceful, but you don't go any further. So sila is the fact here, is the foundation which drives this whole process. And for that reason, we will see that on the Noble Eightfold Path, the idea of sila is incredibly important. You have samma, of course, first of all, we have samma sankappa, which is, I will talk about that later on, but that is kind of the initial aim of where we want to go. Samma vāca, samma kamanta, samma ajiva, all about sila. Samma vayama is also, in a large part, about sila. It's about the sila of the mind. So even sammasati is a lot about sila. It's about purifying the mind. This is one of the things I want to talk about later on when we have a look at the Satipatthana Sutta, is to show how the Satipatthana Sutta is there in large part to help us purify the mind and move towards samadhi. So sila is this very important foundational thing on the Buddhist path, and this is what this particular sutta says. So this is how this sutta works. And now, just to wrap up this particular sutta, I would like to just go through all the factors and show you how they work, step by step, because that is, I think, a very obviously very important here. So once your virtue is in place, right, then non-regret arises in that person. Non-regret is abhipatisara, abhipatisari in the Pali language, and it's probably important to understand what non-regret actually means, right? Non-regret is many different things. Non-regret is when you feel, oh no, I shouldn't have done that. Why did I do that? That was silly. You feel bad about yourself. You feel a bit shameful, right? Because you did something you don't feel it is up to scratch, or up to how you would like to live your life. So this is the first thing, but it's actually much more subtle than that. This idea of non-regret is a very subtle feeling in the mind. It's the feeling that the mind isn't bright, the feeling that there's a little bit of darkness in the mind. You're kind of being held back, right? This is the feeling. And to give you what I find is a very useful way of thinking about non-regret, to think about perhaps the idea of shame, perhaps, or also the idea in the suttas of, it's called the Ditta Dhamma Kamma Vipaka, the Kamma Vipaka in this life, right? The Kamma Vipaka in the suttas is divided into three things. You have the Ditta Dhamma Kamma Vipaka, you have the Samparayika Kamma Vipaka, and then you have the Appara, what's it called? Okay, Kamma Vipaka, okay. So those are the three ones. Thank you for helping me out. So you have the three types of Kamma Vipaka, right? And the ones that we usually focus on are the ones that have to do with the future lives, right? Samparayika and the further down the line, the future lives. So what does it mean? What is the Ditta Dhamma Kamma Vipaka? What is that all about? How do we experience that? And I think that one of the most important ways of experiencing the Ditta Dhamma Kamma Vipaka is the feeling that you get right now when you do an act. And I would recommend you to look at that inside of yourself. When you do a kind act, right? When you do something towards somebody, act of generosity, you say something nice, even when you think something nice about somebody else, how does it feel? How does it feel inside of you? And if it really comes from your heart, if it is a very sincere act of kindness, you will feel straight away that it brightens up the mind, it gives energy to the mind, and it feels very good, right? That to me is the Ditta Dhamma Kamma Vipaka. You feel that Vipaka straight away because you're doing something good. If you do something bad, right, and sometimes it's enough to have a bad thought about somebody. You have a bad thought about somebody and you feel your energy goes down. You feel the brightness goes down. It's like somebody's turning down the lights in your mind and you don't feel that energy anymore. You don't feel the brightness and you feel like you're losing something, right? And this is, to me, part of this vipatisari. Vipatisari, the regret that you have, is that you're losing the energy in the mind. The mind feels more dull, it feels more grey, it loses that brightness which can take you forward in meditation practice. And if you notice that, if you're able to see that in your mind, it's not that difficult to see. If you see that in your mind, you will give you, I think, a very strong sense for the importance of doing what is good. Every time you do something good, you're turning up the lights in your mind, you're brightening up the mind, you're giving yourself energy, and then you're allowing yourself to then enter meditation as a consequence of that. Every time you do something bad, you're dragging yourself away from meditation, away from energy, away from happiness, away from the brightness of the mind. Right? So when you see that inside of yourself, it is a very powerful motivation factor to push you in the right direction. So please observe that, and observe it again and again. I'm sure you have seen it already, but take a special note of that, because it actually, to me, it is a very powerful motivating factor. So that is about non-regret, and because of non-regret, because the mind doesn't have this darkness anymore, because it has brightness inside, joy arises as a consequence, pamujja. And this term joy is this kind of gladness, right? You sit down, you just feel glad inside, you feel a sense of the world feels good, everything feels right, and there's a sense of joy inside of you. I'm sure everybody here has experienced this kind of joyfulness when the world seems right and people around you, everything seems okay in a sense. There's no problems anymore. And together with that joy, and this is also something that you can find by reading the suttas broadly, together with joy always comes mindfulness and energy. Mindfulness, energy, virya, sati, and pamudja tend to arise as three things together on the path. So at this point, mindfulness and energy is also present. But pamudja is like the defining characteristic of this, and that's why it's mentioned, but energy and mindfulness is also there. And then, as you continue, and now remember, at this point, there's nothing more to do. There's no volition, no will that needs to be exerted. All you have to do is just sit back, right? And if the sila is strong enough, if you have purified yourself over a long period of time, then just the fact that you are in the present moment, just the fact that you are watching the breath or whatever it is, naturally it will move from pamudja to piti. And piti is just a stronger form of pamudja. It is often felt as a kind of strong, currents in the body, of kind of pleasurable currents in the body, right? And very often has a physical component to the piti. This is a rapture. It's a deepening. It's a more powerful sense of happiness that you experience as you do this. And then, as you continue, no exertion is required. You're just waiting in the present moment. That piti starts to die down. It becomes more refined. And you get into a state of great tranquility, where everything becomes very peaceful. A state where you don't want to get up anymore. You're just sitting there. You don't want to move anything at all, because you feel so beautifully tranquil. Why would anyone want to do anything when the beauty of meditation and tranquility is so powerful? And because of the power of that tranquility of the body, you also get the tranquility of the mind, and that is the sukha arising. The sukha coming into existence, a very profound and deep state of happiness that has that tranquility as the foundation stone. And what we are doing here, as the happiness increases, the mind is drawn to that happiness. The mind wants happiness. The mind craves happiness. That's why people indulge in sensual pleasures in the world, because happiness is something we're always looking for. But now that we are finding happiness somewhere else, not in sensual pleasures, but we're finding it as a direct experience in the mind, because of that, the mind is now drawn to this instead. Right? And because it is drawn to this is how the ekaggata of the mind can happen. The ekaggata can happen because the mind is now focusing more and more powerful on this one source of bliss that we experience at this time. And that is why samadhi happens as a consequence of sukha. So this is this path, right? More and more tranquility, more and more profound happiness, gradually the mind coming together as a consequence, leading you to samadhi. And then, as a consequence of samadhi, then you have yata bhuta jnana dasana. That is a consequence of samadhi. That is where that comes. It is translated here as knowing and seeing things as they really are. I am not sure if that is the ideal translation. Perhaps to know and see things in accordance to reality is better. Because if you say things as they really are, it's almost like you're saying something is permanent, right? Something has a nature, which is the way it actually is. But really, I think seeing things in accordance with reality is a better way of looking at this. But again, it is something you see here, that it is from samadhi that you get yata bhuta jnana dasana, right? It is samadhi that actually allows you to see things as they actually are. And again, this is something that you see throughout the suttas. It is something you see everywhere. If you go to the Salayatana Samyutta, for example, you go to the Kanda Samyutta, which are often talked about as kind of the Vipassana Bhumi, right? The Vipassana Bhumi, the ground of insight. There too, you see exactly the same thing here. It is samadhi that gives rise to yata bhuta jnana dasana in all of those different contexts. So again, it just shows us the importance of samadhi on the Buddhist path. It is so central, and without samadhi at one stage, and of course the whole Noble Eightfold Path is about samadhi, without that you're basically not going to go to the end of the path. This is what this is saying. I should also probably say, I don't know if you noticed, but when I was reading out this text here, the text says concentration, and you may have noticed I changed the translation to stillness as I was doing that. And I do that in deference to my teacher, Ajahn Brahmali. If he ever heard a recording of this talk and I said concentration, I would be in serious trouble. So for that, I'm not taking any chances. So because of that, I thought I'd say stillness instead. And actually, it is a very good point, because in the way that the word concentration is used in English or any other European language, it may not be so obvious if you're not actually from these countries. But my native tongue is Norwegian, but we also use exactly the same word, concentration, in Norwegian. And usually what it means is that you are focusing on something, right? You are taking hold of the subject or whatever you're doing, focusing your mind, using willpower to be able to do that. That is normally what concentration means. And when people come back from work, they say, oh, I concentrated really hard on the work. That is why I'm so tired, right? That is why you're tired. Concentration in Buddhism is not about being tired. It's about the opposite. It's about gaining energy. It's about gaining lightness and brightness. It's the exact opposite. So it matters how we translate these things. Actually, is very, very important. So I then say stillness is samadhi. Maybe shouldn't be translated at all, because we don't have a word for samadhi in English, right? English language, European culture, is not a culture that has this kind of meditation practice. So we don't have a word for these things. So maybe the best thing is just to leave it and call it samadhi instead. Anyway, that is just... it's important to reflect on these things, right? If you are a translator and if you think about the suttas deeply, words have meaning. It's very important to get the right meaning across. Otherwise, we lead people astray so easily. And I think that this may very well be one of the reasons why so many people have problems in their meditation. Many places when you travel, people talk about the samadhi headache, right? They're practicing samadhi, they get headaches. And the reason they get headaches is because they focus too much, right? They really use that, they kind of, press the tongue against the roof of the mouth and they kind of clench their teeth. And that is how they practice samadhi, forcing the mind onto the object. And of course, then you can get a headache as a consequence. So these things do indeed matter. So that is the Volition Sutta. There's many, many more things I should really say about this sutta. One of the things I will say very quickly about this sutta also is that when you look at this sutta and you compare it to many of the other important suttas in the Pali Canon, you can see how they match up stage by stage. For example, you can see how this Volition Sutta matches up with the Anapanasati Sutta, right? The sutta on mindfulness of breathing here. And you can see how it actually traces basically the same kind of course in meditation practice. You can match it up with the Anusatis. The Anusatis are the recollections. Buddhanusati, Dhammanusati, Sanghanusati, Silanusati, Chaganusati, and the Devanusati. And they also are basically exactly the same exposition. You can match it up with the Bojjhangas, the factors of awakening. And again, there too, you see a similar kind of exposition, one factor leading to the next one. I'm just saying this because all of these different ways of looking at this process are just different ways, slightly different angles, slightly different terminology, looking at exactly the same thing here. So the Dhamma is very interesting. The Dhamma is like a united whole. Sometimes it's hard to see that because you read different suttas and you may think that it's all different pieces, right? But they're all different pieces that fit together very beautifully, like a jigsaw puzzle. And it's very nice to see how it all fits together and then understand the big picture, right? When it all fits together, you see the big picture, and then you can understand the context of each piece, the context it has in the big picture of things. Okay, so I will very quickly have a look at the next sutta. It's very simple, because this works together with the previous sutta very nicely. I haven't gone for a full hour quite yet, so I'm going to please bear with me for a few more minutes. And this is called the Bala Pandita Sutta in Pali. It's from the Majjhima Nikaya 129, and it's translated here as fools and wise men. But actually, Bala Pandita does not mean fools and wise men. It just means fools and the wise. That's all it means, really, here. So this is how these things tend to creep into translations. So I will read this through, and then I will very quickly explain to you what the significance of this is. Again, when a wise man is on his chair or on his bed or resting on the ground, then the good actions that he did in the past, his good bodily, verbal and mental conduct, cover him, overspread him, and envelop him. Just as the shadow of a great mountain peak in the evening covers, overspreads, and envelops the earth, so too, when a wise man is on his chair or on his bed or resting on the ground, then the good actions that he did in the past, his good bodily, verbal, and mental conduct, cover him, overspread him, and envelop him. Then the wise man thinks, I have not done what is evil or bad. I have not done what is cruel. I have not done what is wicked. I have done what is good. I have done what is wholesome. I have made myself a shelter from anguish or from fear. When I pass away, I shall go to the destination of those who have not done all of these things, but who have done what is good, done what is wholesome, who have made themselves a shelter from fear. He does not sorrow, grieve, and lament. He does not weep, beating his breast and become distraught. This is the third kind of pleasure and joy that the wise man feels here and now. So this gives you an idea of how virtue works when sila is practiced to the full, how it actually works. And this is kind of the importance of this. Because the idea here is that when you come back, right, and you're resting on the ground, when you're not busy anymore, you're away from all the daily activities, you're not doing all your work, cleaning your house, looking after your family, and all these kind of things. Or even for monastics sometimes get busy, right? Sometimes you have to do all kind of stuff, teaching engagements, or perhaps building work or whatever. Everybody gets busy every now and again. But then when you get away from that busyness, and you calm down, and you're peaceful, and you're just enjoying the peace, then all the goodness of your past, it comes back to you, and it envelops you, it immerses through your body and mind, and then you feel sukha and somanassa. These are the two words here, joy and pleasure that it feels. Sukha and somanassa you feel as a consequence, right? So all of these goodness actions, it's like they suffuse you completely here, and you're no longer able to get away from the happiness that you have built by yourself, by living a virtuous and good life, by developing sila to the highest possible extent. So this is what this is about. And this, again, what this shows you is that the idea is you develop the virtue, you develop all the goodness, you develop your character, until you come to a point when the happiness comes as a natural consequence of having developed this. Right? And then once that happiness has been, once that virtue has been developed, so happiness comes automatically, then this process that we're looking at in the previous sutta happens by itself. This is how that last little sutta just matches up with the previous one. It comes to the point where you can no longer get away from all the good actions you have done. They have to affect you, they have to envelop you, they have to you are immersed almost in the goodness of your own actions. Okay, I think that is plenty enough for this morning. It's amazing how much you can go through in one little hour. How much you can. That is great. And then this afternoon we will get back and we will continue this afternoon on the next sutta, which is called Ignorance. And now we will talk more directly about the Noble Eightfold Path. So this is more by way of background to understand the process of meditation. And now we can focus more on the Noble Eightfold Path itself. So I'll see you again also at Pindabad, but then also at 3 o'clock this afternoon.